In this video, you learn how to use the Microsoft Authentication Library and Microsoft Graph API to create teams in Zervicepoint. Okay, so in this PM from a dude at Microsoft, they inform us that the old way of retrieving data from Azure AD will reach an end of life and be deprecated on the in 2 years, actually. And they now want everyone to use this new way of authenticating and retrieving data in Azure AD. The way is to use the Microsoft Authentication Library together with the Microsoft Graph API. And the Microsoft Authentication Library, there's a little change in how we used to do stuff towards the Graph API. And the difference is that you have set up an app, and you do a web service call with a secret or a certificate, and in return you get a token, and you use that token to do your follow-up calls when creating groups and users and teams and stuff like that. So we need some new code to be able to do this. And I followed a guide that I found here. And this dude makes all of that in this tutorial. And we can just see the table of contents here to see the steps. And we need the prerequisites. Is basically we need an Azure AD or a tenant. And then we need to create an application to get the application ID. And we need to create a secret so we can authenticate. And we can do that with secret or a certificate. So I'm going to go with secret. And then we add permissions to the application. So the application is sort of our relying party in Azure. And then the guide goes on how to use PowerShell to acquire access token. And then to look at the output of the access token, because we're going to use some data from the access token to do our following calls afterwards. So I've been doing a lot of preparation here. Let's look at the folder structure that I set up first. I have my plugin here. So I have created a Teams plugin. And if you don't know how to create the plugin, go to docs.zervicepoint.com and under resources and under activities, you find a quick guide on how to set up your first plugin. So I have the basic folder structure here. I focused on a shared module first. I called it Microsoft Authentication Library Management. And if we look on that file, I created 2 functions. One to actually get the authorization header, and one to invoke a Microsoft Authentication Library method, or basically it's a wrapper for invoke web request, or a REST method rather. And if we look on the get authorization header method first, or function, it takes a credential name, takes a tenant name, takes an app ID, and a scope. And most of this code I stole from this dude. So we have this code here, and I basically copied this and did some changes to it. So I made parameters for most of the stuff you need, and I put a credential name parameter here so I can get the credential and take the password, and you can store, and that's your app secret basically. So if we zoom out a little first here and we look on the application that I created, I go to my Azure AD, and so if you come in here, you go up here and you click on Azure Active Directory, you click on app registrations, not enterprise application, but app registrations. And you will need to create a new registration here. I just created this. And it's important to take the application ID, so I copied that and put it in Notepad. When you set up this, you will get some options as well. You will need to set up a redirect URI. So I took a web URI, a redirect URI, and just put it to zervicepoint.com. Doesn't really matter in this case because we only need the token, and we use the token to do the following calls. And then we set up a secret, code cookie secret. And with the secret, you will choose how it will be used. And I think I used the first option, which is delegated. It's in the guide, so if you follow that, it will work as well. Then you need to set up the API permissions. So I just added some basic permissions here, like to create teams, read write in the directory, and so on. And then you need to grant permission. So if you're an admin of some, like a global admin, you can just click here to grant all the permissions immediately. Else you would need to do this, you would ask a global administrator to grant these permissions. Okay, so we took the secret from here, and we took the application ID from here. We also need to take our tenant name. So in our case, it's ServicePoint on Microsoft.com. And what I've done, if we go back to PowerShell, I've made most of those things into configuration, because I want to make a plugin that we can distribute on other customers as well, or other systems where they have their own tenants. So I'll go into my folder here. Look at my provider XML. And yeah, okay, so my tenant name is servicepoint.onmicrosoft.com. App ID, which I copied before, and I stored the secret in the credential that I created like this: new PF credential name msol, because that's the name I specified here. Then its username, and that doesn't matter, so she's, and the password should be the app. The secret. And that way I can, when I use this module, I can send in the credential name and tenant name and app ID, and it will work from that. So later, when I use this shared module, like in my activities, I can use it like this. So I can take from config, and that's the credential name from config, and that will be msall. And the tenant name comes from config as well, and the app ID comes from config as well. Swell, that's nice. And here's the URL to get the token. And you need to have the tenant name in here, so we just put that in there. And then we create a body. And that's basically, we use all the parameters we collected. And we have create a post splat, and we call it a splat because you can splat all the parameters and arguments using the @ syntax later when you use invoke REST method. And then we just return a hash containing an authorization key with the request token type whitespace request access token. Okay, so when we use this out here, we put it in a header variable. Then a neat thing is to have a function or a function to wrap the invoke of REST method call, because we can add some smart logic in here. So when I want to actually do a REST call in my activities later, I will do invoke msall method instead, and I can throw in the header if I like to, and specify the method, and then a route, because this is pretty smart. If you want to create a new user, you post on use post as method, and you use users instead of groups, for instance, but it will use the same code. So that way we can add retry functionality and stuff like that. Because if you look on the recommendations here, I watched this movie, this clip about optimizing the throttling and the throttling guidance. You may be throttling, and if you be throttled, and if you're throttled, you will get the 429 error. Too many requests, and if you get that, the response will also contain information on how long it does want you to wait before trying again. And it will return it like this. In the response header, it will have retry after, and we just read that, and then we just start sleep, and we retry after that. So we do the same call again. And then we have a max retry limit here as well, which you can specify in the parameters. So we'll do maximum of 10 retry attempts. And also, when working with teams, for instance, you must create a group in Azure AD first. And once the group is created, you can create a team, or you can provision a team for that group. But when you do the initial call to create a group, and then you just immediately after start to provision a team for that group, the group may not have been synchronized completely yet, in which case you will get the 404 error when you try to provision the team. So I added a little retry functionality there that I haven't tried out very much, but just to be safe, it seems to work in this tests I've done. And if we look on my activity here for creating a new ServicePoint Teams team, basically I've exposed all the different configuration you can do on your team, and many of these apply to the group that you create in the first stage as well. So we can look on them. We have a display name. It will be the same for the group and the team. And a mail nickname, which you'll use in Outlook if you want to mail to the group or team. A description, which can differ between the group and the team, I believe. But for this activity, I'm going to use the same description for both group and team. You need to have at least one owner, and an owner in this case is the ID of that Azure AD user. And member or members is you need to have the Azure AD there as well. Mail enabled. I put some default values here: false, security enabled, false, dynamic membership. And then I added this team template because there's so many configuration parameters here. You can I was thinking about implementing some kind of JSON file and naming each JSON file to a type of team. So maybe you could have a service where you have a team template selector, so the user doesn't need to know all the technicalities further down. And then we have team visibility, and I haven't implemented that yet either, but it could be good to have. So you can set 0 to public and 1 to have a private team. And then we have all the permission parameters, like allow users to create private channels under this team, to update channels, delete channels, to add and remove apps, and so on. You have a couple here related to guests as well. Allow guests to create and update channels, allow guests to delete channels. And then you have the fun configuration. That's the Microsoft name, fun. And that could be to allow GIFs, custom memes, stickers and memes. All right, and then I added some standard parameters that we usually have in activities in ServicePoint, like a prefix. So because if you have a pass-through that you want to throw out you want to know the ID of the team you just created, you check pass-through, and the name of the variable will be ID. But if you want to have a different, if you want to prefix that variable name, you can write my new team in prefix, and the variable will be called my new team ID. Swell. And then I look at all the parameters, and if you have dynamic membership set, I will set group types, create an array, and add these two strings to it. And else I will just create an array with this single value. And why do I create an array? Yeah, that's because group types, when I post this, I create a hash table, and this property takes an array, and on the inside of this invoke MSAll method, if we look at that, what I do, well, we work with the request parameters here, and in the body we put the body that you send in, but we first convert it to JSON. So I create a hash here in one syntax because it's easier to read this way, and then we convert it to JSON, and it will work. And then we do some handling on the member. So if you have sent in a member ID, you can send in many members, and you separated. If you bind it to a drop-down, for instance, in ServicePoint, it will be separated by semicolons, but you can send it in with colon separated as well, because I did it like this. So I first split on colon and then on semicolon. So regardless if you bind this statically in the workflow editor or you bind it to a drop-down, this is a good way to make it work in both cases. And since the owner needs to be a member as well, we have this code to add any owner you specified, owner ID. We do it the same way, and if they're not already specified as member, we add them to the members array as well. And then we do a little string handling on it. Because we need to send in the reference to ID when we use this field. We shouldn't just send in the ID to the web service call. We send in the whole reference, the URI for the user, so to say. And we do a little more handling with the owners as well, because we need to, when we send in the owner in the body of this, we need to prepend the URI as well. And then we take most parameters and we put it in the body, and then we invoke our MSAll method. And we have some error handling here. So that's the first step, to create the team, create the group. And now we want to create the team on the group. So we have all those switches and parameters that you sent in, and we put that in this structure that I created here. I pipe it to remove pf null hash property, because we remove anything that's empty here. And then we just do this again, and if the user has specified pass-through, we work with the team, the return object, and clean it by using this function from PowerFrame. And we remove this, because if you try to return that to ServicePoint, you will get an exception. We add we add an activity status and an error code, and then we just return it to ServicePoint. So let's go over to Zervicepoint. So here I have my team service that I created, and here's the administration interface for it. So in the workflow editor, I just inventoried my new activity that we just looked at. And we put a bunch of, well, we have all the parameters here. I haven't really exposed many of them in the form. I only exposed the display name, alias for mail, description, owners, and members. So if we refresh here, so let's call this cookie 7. Yeah, I created a bunch of test teams. This should be removed. Owners, myself. Members, Daniel, Lisa. And if this works now, I should also be a member. I'm placing this order. And I need to start up my process system and my provisioning system. Do I need to? I think I need to run it as a different user. I'm trying this. Let's see if the order has left the queued state. I have Teams open here, so if I'm being put into a team, I should be getting a notification. It seems it started. It's very quiet. So we got an error. Bad request. Oh, okay. So we can't have a mail nickname with a white space in it, I guess. Terminating this. Code cookie 7. Okay, so we need to fix that code as well then. I placed another order. Seems to be running. Something happened here. Cookie 7. A new team. Okay, I can't access the content yet. Yet. Okay, so I have a team. And now I'd probably like to create some channels as well. But I think the way we're going to tackle that is to use another activity, or create a new activity for creating a team. And that activity takes a team ID as input parameter, and then a display name and description of the channel. And we add it, and we can add it to the team we just created. So in the sequence, we just add it afterwards, or in the workflow, I mean. Teams. No, it's called team. So we add it in here just afterwards, but instead of new task, new channel. And we take the output from this one, that's the team ID, and we put it into the team ID parameter on the second activity. Okay, I think we'll perhaps do a follow-up video on this, where we create a channel. And if you have any questions, or if you'd like to have the source code, reach out to me on Slack, or write a comment below the video. Have a nice time, or thanks for watching. Make sure you tune in next week for a new fresh code cookie.